All right, back with Vince Sigala, a good friend. Talk to him all the time. We always talk. I don't say always. We'd have a number of discussions, and Vince always generous with his time. We're just going off on stuff. Look up to Vince as a mentor, and we've always been planning on doing something, just riffing some ideas. So this is what we're doing here. And I thought this topic would be good because even when I first read your story in the warning, which is back there somewhere in my bookshelf, your story jumped out to me the most because I think because I resonated with you the most, and the fact that we all have different. Your experience was way more dramatic than what my childhood was. The stuff you went through, and if anyone hasn't checked that out, definitely check that out in the warning, or just check out your channel for that, which will link all that down below. But just basically a guy who grew up in the world, exposed to a lot of temptations, a lot of the demons. I think a lot of guys are. I talked to a guy yesterday. God bless him. Didn't have those temptations. Just always just was a good, devout Christian family. He didn't have those, and that's what he's trying to pass on to his kids. And I'm like, oh, you're lucky. He's
Yeah.
like, I didn't have that. I didn't have that Paul experience that I had, but some people don't get out of that. And so, what I want to talk to you about is, I think we're kind of two down to earth, grassroots guys, but at the same time, I'll put you in a higher pedestal than me, but trying to get that path of holiness, doing the best we can. Where most guys, I think, maybe they believe in God, but they're not doing as much as they can to get engaged, especially if they're a Catholic. So, kind of man to man, kind of straight talk as far as, because my opinion is I don't think most guys that walk into a church, especially the modern Catholic church, are going to want to feel connected with it. My opinion. So, topic that I had here is is there any problem with the modern Catholic church and the way we see it in attracting the typical guy? Is it the masculine type of guy, that kind of energy that I think is lacking in the church? And my other kind of counter question of this is, has it become a little feminine? Nothing wrong with feminine energy, of course, with Our Lady, the ultimate feminine energy. But
Mm.
so before I go on, let's just what's kind of like your backstory into that specifically? Not to retell the whole bio, but how would you say your backstory is, just where you came from to where you are now, being a regular dude, and now to where you are right now, on fire with the faith, still having those masculine energy, and you're machismo dude. People just see you and look at you, and you're built like a tank, still doing awesome stuff,
What, you'd
but
you'd be a
still,
bigger tank.
yeah,
I'm a mini tank.
yeah. I gotta stop. I gotta stop ranting. But yeah, what do you think? What do you think? And just a little bio too.
Well, for me growing up, it was always I always felt like I was fighting against something. Okay, so I understood the negativity in my life, and then when those traumas and those hurts and those pains weren't dealt with in the right way, I didn't have the proper channels. I took on the world basically, thinking, and just went into it. I went into the world a very um, angry person, angry at the world, angry at friends, angry at my dad, angry at babysitters, just angry with everybody, angry with God because I couldn't, you couldn't understand why you get dealt those cards and that kind of thing. But that's the one I think. Going through that, I've always been resilient in the sense that I would never give up. Okay, so it doesn't, not saying that what I was doing was right, but it was the in the right way. But I think my father instilled that in me, and my mother from a very young age, especially my mom, watching her. But there was a resilience and a perseverance that you just don't give up. You keep working, you keep working, you keep fighting, you keep fighting, you keep fighting. And so when I came back into the faith, and my reversion back into the church, all of those early experiences that I had of the Lord when I was younger came flooding back into me. But I was old enough to understand that there's an actual battle going on, and it was dealing with, as Paul says, principalities and powers, right? What I began to understand was that there was no way that I would be strong enough to ever overcome not only my own demons, but fight against the ones that were out there without the presence of God within me. And so the whole idea of of a of a just battle, I've always found enticing, I guess you would say. And so in that sense, the I don't know if you'd call it masculinity, or I think it was toxic masculinity when I was younger. Obviously, a certain attitude. It's not. I wouldn't even call it masculinity. I would call it an attitude that God instills within you, that you are fighting for a just cause. you know. If I were to move into, um, I think that when you sent me these topics, I was really thinking about it. I spent some time, but in pondering the masculinity within the church, I began to contemplate some of the people that I know and that I have known in the church. What I can tell you is that some of the most passive men that I have ever met in the church are actually the strongest warriors.
For sure. Yeah.
And and because they are prayer warriors, and I mean deep spiritual lives. And then there are other men that I know that are, I wouldn't say passive. They're probably not as, how would I say, I'm pretty outspoken, you know what I mean? I'm kind of
Yeah.
right out there. They're a little more reserved, um, but they know how to take care of themselves too.
Yeah.
I got a friend of mine that's actually my youngest son's godfather. Um, this guy's tough as nails, but you'd never
Yeah.
know it, just looking at him. He's the nicest, sweetest, soft-spoken guy in the world, you know.
And
But
that's usually
he,
how it is. You know that we all know the dangerous guy is the quiet one.
yeah, the quieter
Yeah.
ones,
So
yeah,
definitely,
yeah.
and I
So
definitely don't want to say up front, we're not trying to say that what we're trying to say portray that maybe is lacking. And at least I'm saying that. I don't know what Vince is saying, but the lacking masculinity in the church, I'm not saying it to go in there, hard and aggressive, for sure.
right,
Because I
yeah,
think our Lord was that perfect balance of ultimate man, but also ultimate humility and that
right.
sweet spot what I'm aiming for.
Yeah, just an unbelievable, obvious empathy for everybody. Okay, but he was also very stern at times, and so there's a balance there. I mean, this is the same guy that told the woman, go and sin no more, right? Was the same guy that took a whip and chased people out of the temple.
Yeah.
And so passionate, I think, is the word, but people, I think, express that passion in different ways. you know
Look, I wonder if you had this experience because this is what happened to me is that when I would always have this call to God, and of course it's a grace. We can't say, well, this ideal church is what pulls us in. I mean, it's God's grace is let ultimately at the end of the day is pulling us, and you kind of alluded to that so much as that. Uh, but I would always have this pull of going back to church when I'd walk in there. It just didn't. It felt I used the word kind of churchy, like even if that was like a kind of kumbaya, especially that some of the churches nowadays with a guitar. I was like,
yeah,
I'm not. This isn't gravitating to me. But if I had a couple of times, you'd have one or two priests or a really good homily from the same priest, and you just don't see that many. I'm being careful with my words here, but you know what I mean. You don't see many old school, at least how they used to be, priests how they used to be. If they're not, there's a good book here. I got Goodbye, Good Men. It gets into, I think, the problem that caused some of the priests we have now, but I won't go into that
hmm
too much. But you guys see where I'm going with that. But I feel like those one or two couple of good homilies that should be fairly consistent, not these rare things. Or I had a good priest coming, like, whoa. Then I'm like on the edge of my seat. I'm like, where has this been? And I
hmm
talk to guys, and these are the ones that leave the Catholic Church and join these mega churches because they got some guys not afraid to share what is on his mind, and they look up to that. Versus, I think if I was just going into typical church, and yes, I think if you get the level of spirituality, you'll soak in anything. But
right,
I think you see what I'm saying. Like,
yeah.
did you
I
ever
I
have that when you were first getting to the church? Like, it's me and a bunch of
I've
old. So
yeah, well, yeah, I've been well, let me put it this way. I can tell you what I've learned. Okay, I used to be, I was in a parish where there was a great priest, really, really soft spoken, wanted to please everybody, completely, totally obedient to the church and to the magisterium, but so much so that I would see him being manipulated, and so he was caught up. His time was caught up so much trying to please everyone that no one was ever pleased, and then he really didn't have the time that he needed, I think, to spend on his homilies. Now, I don't know that for sure. What I do know is they're some of the longest homilies I've ever heard, and I would grit my teeth through them because they were just circular.
right,
And there was no, so it was really hard to,
which I would say is almost the norm. I mean, outside of most,
yeah,
most, if I walk into any random parish, sometimes it's like, I like what you're saying, but I don't know where this is. I don't know what I got.
yeah.
There's
So
meat there.
let me give you what I got out of that. Okay. And what I learned from that, because I when I began to focus more on what God was saying to me, I would get I would get one little piece of that homily would touch me, and I would walk away with something rather than spending them. You know what I mean? Because you can get
Yeah.
distracted going,
Right.
gosh, this is taking, I mean,
Yeah.
what's this guy trying to say? If you go into prayer and and not be distracted with what you don't like,
Yeah.
then
Sure.
there's more of an opportunity that you'll be able to hear God speak to you, and so I think with the kumbaya thing, a lot of that happened. As a lot of the older priests that we have came into the church, when in the 70s, late
Yeah.
60s, early 70s, so I think that a lot of that had to do with it, just the culture they're in. But I've also learned this, that it's one of the reasons that I guess one of the sayings that I put out there, or one of the slogans, is to stay in the middle of the boat. Because I know priests that are very, very good friends of mine that are extremely liberal, and we would never agree on politics. We would never agree on some of the things going on in the church. But it's some of these same men have a gift of wisdom
For
that is
sure. Yeah.
second to none. And so when you receive spiritual direction or guidance from one of these people, just in general in life, in your relationship with God, in your everyday kind of going abouts and that kind of thing, unbelievable insight and wisdom. And so the way that I see this is that, for me anyway, when I stand back out of the situation, I see I see the split in a church happening because people are choosing sides. The real traditionalists are right, and then they jump that, and hopefully don't go all the way off to the side, and then other people that are going to the liberal side, and it's really a meeting in the middle is where it's supposed to happen. So the liberals want to run ahead faster than the boat is going, right? And
Yeah.
the hardline traditionalists are really the ones that keep that from happening. They kind of, so they're running too fast that some of the traditionalists are not even running. They're just kind of like walking, dragging their feet. They just don't want to move out of history,
Yeah.
out of sin. But it really kind of balances. Where we get the division is when people start choosing sides, I
Yeah.
think. And so, um, I, for me personally, I would see it from a male perspective. I see that as a lack of masculinity. Okay, and what I mean by that, well, I won't say a lack of masculinity. What's a better way to phrase that? Um,
I mean, it's co-opted. You mean on the
they
traditional
have
hard right? You mean?
it's almost like a fear that if you're not in one camp, then you're going to
Right.
lose.
Yeah.
The real
Yeah.
courage is when you're standing alone with God. So
Well, in human nature, people want to pick sides. They want to be on, like a typical. I think it's kind of a guy thing too. You want to choose your team and support that team or that decision.
yeah, the
Yeah.
danger is that if you choose one side that only sees one way, then
Yeah.
then that's really unwise, because to not listen to another side is really to ignore knowledge. And when you ignore knowledge, you're shutting down wisdom.
And
And
that's
so
kind
the
of what I wanted
two,
to say too, because you have those two sides. Because I think it's easy if you're getting on, especially Catholic media, where I think what's attractive sometimes it can easily pull you to that extreme right because that like that message you're not getting, and you're just, oh, I love this. What is this? And it
yeah,
pulls you that direction. And that was something I was going to talk about. Right. Well, I'll talk about it now. Is that you kind of have it almost seems like, especially if you're on like social media or just Catholic YouTube or whatever, that the traditionalist route, you see a lot of these guys saying this argument that we're saying here. And we're not on that side of the camp, although I think a lot of things we would agree with what they're saying. And they
hmm
put out this front too that has, I don't see for lack of a better term, the spirit really coming out in them, like the empathy, the humility coming out. I see a lot of pride, posturing type of stuff. And again,
right.
we can't deny the money and clicks and just sticking to a position,
Oh yeah.
marketing that. So I think that's for sure the other thing. But how I do think there's some truth though, and always trying to find walk this line. And I'll come back even to the original topic that as a guy, I'll do the typical guy, and maybe he's just walking in and probably he might be him, maybe the wife. And unfortunately, the statistics, I said this to you the other day, or I just briefly mentioned it to you maybe in the email. Fortunately, even though the guys weren't attending, at the very least, we know it's not good, but at least the wife was taking the ropes and bringing them to
hmm
mass. Now the wives and females are checking out of mass, and this is just
right.
a perfect storm. But let's just say best case scenario, you got two even keel Catholics. They have their kids. They want to bring them to mass. They're both kind of going, but they're both kind of bored, not really checking in. Not a lot's happening at home. I think the female might feel a little more comfortable because the comment I always hear, and again, I don't know, but I'll talk to people casual, like neighbors. They're like, I don't like the females usually want I go here because I like the music better or something kind of superficial, and I can understand.
Right,
And the guy is kind of like, whatever, I'll go. It's good to teach religion, but that's about where it stays. And I
right.
do think they'd appreciate if everything was all Latin mass how it used to be from previously 1960 pre 1960s. That was a little more militaristic and maybe was devoid of some of that feminine interest. I don't know, but I can see where a
Hmm.
guy would like that. So, like you said, finding that sweet spot, it's kind of tricky. But I also, the same end of the spectrum, I think we need the guys to have some sort of interest in that mass or liturgy that
Hmm.
compels them to say, "We have to go here. I'm getting something out of this. This is important." And I don't know where that
Right.
balance is. See what I'm
I
saying?
think well from a marriage standpoint, and again, I'm speaking from a place of being single, now. But what I can tell you just in listening, I think from a marital standpoint, if you have the wife that kind of likes the newer stuff, likes the music, that kind of thing, and the guy is more into the traditional Latin mass, I think there would be a compromise that needs to be made. So it's like one week you go to the one she wants to, the next week you go to the Latin and make a compromise that way. Because the last thing that you want to do is, and I can tell you this, as a husband, as a man, the last thing that you want to do is try to force a woman to do something that she doesn't want to. Okay,
I
and
made that mistake. Yeah, for sure.
yeah, well, see, and we all do, right? So we're guys, we do this. So half our problem, I would say 99.9% of our problem as men is our hearing. We listen to what they say, but we don't really hear what they say. And so the reason I say compromise, now I understand, like the reading we had today, right? Women should be submissive to their husbands in all things. But it also says that husbands should love their wives as Christ loved the church. The last thing you want to do is take your wife to a liturgy where she's not being fed.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? And
Yes.
so, like I say, there's a compromise there. Now, with that being said, I think there's a lot more tradition that's starting to come back um, into the Novus Ordo Mass. I know the one we do here, and I'm in California, but I'm blessed to have a really good pastor, two really good pastors in a row now. Um, we do the traditional Latin Mass here every Sunday at 1. We do the Novus Ordo Mass. There's a Portuguese Mass we do. Um, but even the Novus Ordo Mass, sometimes some of the hymns are sung in Latin. Um, his the altar boys are dressed as if they would be dressed in Latin Mass. It's
Mm.
very, very reverent. And so um, I kind of go back and forth because there's times where I need the Latin Mass to be. It's more of a deeper contemplative type of thing, as where in most of the Novus Ordo masses with the modern music and that kind of thing, it's more of a worship. But that's, if you think about liturgy, that's why we're there, is to worship God. And so it doesn't, the sacrifice and all that doesn't change. And that's where you can go to extremes, one or
Yeah.
the other. You know, um,
Well, it's
I
similar to
guess the
that was my experience. I mean, when I had the reversion, it was a regular. Actually, before I had the reversion, we were going casually to. This was again, I was young first when my first child was born. I wanted to go, but again, I wasn't. There was some weird stuff in the bulletin, and I'm like, this isn't cool. But again, it was political, wasn't faith based. But anyways, when I had the reversion, this was I don't know 6 years ago. When I found the Latin mass, I'm like, oh, this is it. This is it. We got to go. My wife grew up. She essentially was Jewish, basically, but technically, because if the mom's Jewish type of thing, which makes my kids actually technically Jewish by Jewish law.
That's awesome. Well,
Yeah, yeah,
go have her
yeah,
read Leviticus.
yeah. Well, she
So
didn't. She grew up essentially like, with nothing. So like her dad was Catholic, but they just didn't want to do anything. But so her all this was foreign. So hers like, oh, I don't care, we'll go. But very out of place. It was veiled, and she just felt very out of place, out of touch. And I didn't care because I'm like in my mind, well, if you don't care, we got to go where I got to go.
there are some women here at the Novus Ordo Mass that wear a veil.
Yeah, well, that's where we go now. And long
Yeah.
story short, she actually came into the church 2 years ago, and she's on fire, which her story is a miracle in itself. But I basically had to put down the Latin mass because she was comfortable with this local one. It was a lot more relaxed. I'm like, let's just go here. I can see you're happy, and that actually did allow her to go through our CIA and actually appreciate the faith. Now she's on fire, and now she's recognizing the things I was saying. So it's not like she's not doesn't go to Latin mass. We've gone recently, but even then she's like, I'll go there once in a while, but that's not for me,
Hmm.
which is fine. But like you said, I think the important thing is definitely encourage shop around a little bit because now the place we go, it's a perfect balance of it's just the deacon and the priest are giving communion. Nothing wrong with Eucharistic ministers, but not like the army you have.
Right.
And it's basically that mix of reverent, but it's Novus Ordo. And
Right.
I think she appreciates that too. But I think those things were there for a reason to help kind of, at least for our journey. That's the beauty of our church. So we have so much options.
Hmm.
But I think that's maybe a message you're getting at too, especially for a guy, is to maybe don't settle for that one church. Because my whole thing in this discussion is, how do you get those guys to bring them to church? Because I think if you just talk to a regular guy and you bring, let's go to your local parish, and the typical parish, I hate to say this, probably they're going to be like, this to me, the whole overall thing was, it just felt very feminine and,
Hmm.
lack of a better term.
Well, I think, and again, this is just my opinion. I've only lived in California my whole life, so I'm speaking from a pretty liberal state. You know, from my experience, and I can only speak for myself personally. Was that when in my reversion now, the when I came back into the church, I went to a very small parish, and it happened to be with the priest that became my spiritual director and still is. When I don't see him every single day, but the calls are, there's more time in between the calls, let's say that, but I can call anytime I like for spiritual direction. But the homilies, that's what I noticed with Father Nesbitt, was his homilies. There was always, he would always bring things. First of all, he would explain the history of the scripture. So he's a scholar, which was beautiful. But his homilies were short and to the point, and they always came back around to somehow focus inward. So there was a challenge, and as opposed to some of the parishes that I've been after we moved from down by Monterey up to closer to Sacramento. There was just love and mercy, and you're forgiven, and Jesus loves you. And so I think that, like I say, and you'll get that with a lot of liberal priests, that's just this big mercy God. But this is where the traditionalists, like I say, kind of keep things in line, and you can have them go off the deep end, to say, well, if anybody that's not Catholic is going to hell. But do you realize, if that's actually true, right, then Satan's won, especially in the world today, because we even have Catholics that aren't living their faith. You see what I mean? And then on the other side of that, you can go so far to the left, liberal, that you say, well, it doesn't matter what you do, Jesus will forgive you. And then you're almost moving into like a non-denominational church doctrine, where all you have to do is accept Jesus as your Lord and Savior, and you can do whatever you want for the rest of your life, and you're going to heaven because he died for your sins, which is a bunch of,
Yeah.
what, BS. Because so there has to be a balance. There's about, just with the same as there is with God, there's a balance between mercy and justice. You can't have mercy without justice, and you can't have justice without mercy. They go hand in hand,
Yeah.
you see. And
Yeah.
so I think, again, from my personal um, opinion, from me, okay, I would say what is missing in most parishes is a challenge for men. And so we're not challenged. I mean, like today's reading from St. Paul, right? Um, you talk, the priest could have laid it out right there. Love your wife as Christ loved the church. I
Yeah.
mean, think about that.
And
You
well,
know,
you know as well as I do. I mean, if you read it just how it is, I think it's balanced enough. But 9 times out of 10 now, with Catholic or not Catholic, you're going to read that now, especially in the culture we're in. It's just going to be, let's really highlight that latter part and bring up how yes, we're equal, but we have different charisms, different attributes there
right,
for a reason. And I guess going back to the Latin Mass stuff too, is just that there was definitely a trend. The biggest thing I saw there is, like, I'm just seeing way more men ever, and not just way more men, way more families, but I think those things go hand in hand.
right.
Way more younger men too, or just
Mm-hmm.
at least middle-aged men. It was just me there, just like myself now, getting gray hair. You actually saw guys in there, even young kids. And so I think, and that's kind of trying to piece it out. I think you've kind of hit it, is that challenge aspect. But is there something else that in the liturgy that attracts them? Because I think it's got to be that liturgy that's pulling them in. And I also think it's the
Well,
liturgy that sometimes is pushing them out,
right. I think
intentional or not intentional.
ultimately what should be drawing us to Mass is God, is the Eucharist. Okay. And that's first and foremost. And so if we're looking for external things to draw us into Mass or to bring us there, that's not to say that God can't use the external things to draw us closer to him. He can. There's a sense of reverence,
Don't
but
you
it was
think
the,
that's it? I
if you
think
think
that's it
about,
right there, though. The Eucharist. I mean, that was the big thing is the Latin. You have that Latin mass. That seems this is real to me.
right,
What they're doing and what they're saying. But we know we can go forever about. Well, it's this is the Eucharist body of Christ, and someone's given it to me just in their t-shirt and jeans, and just
right.
versus reverently kneeling. You see. I think that their carryover of seeing another adult guy just like you getting on his knees, like whoa, that visually just okay, something's important here. So that my
Yeah,
point
there's
you're
a,
up to
so I,
with the
yeah,
Eucharist.
so the Novus Ordo, I go to, I attend both the Novus Ordo or the Latin Mass, depending on what mood I'm in. A lot of it has to do with what I feel like I'm where I'm going to be closest to him. Sometimes the Latin Mass, it's hard for me to follow. I'm going to be honest with you.
Yeah.
It's hard for me to follow, but I find in that I start to go into deep contemplation because I'm not really paying attention. I know I'm confident that the prayers and everything is done. I know that for sure, right? Especially with the pastor that we have. But I find myself going into very deep contemplation, especially into scripture. The Latin Mass really takes me back to the old tabernacle, the first tabernacle, with the incense, and I mean, it's just beautiful. And so it takes me into some very deep contemplations. But the Novus Ordo Mass is, when I say there are more distractions there, that's what I would agree with you on that. The people, sometimes the way people dress with, they're wearing shorts and flip flops, and then you got this music. There's nothing worse than bad music when the person can't sing, and then the priest is too nice to tell the person, you shouldn't sing. You might want to look into another ministry or hire someone.
Or a bad reader for that matter, too.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. So like I say, I'm really blessed in the parish I'm in. We're very blessed. But the what I find is I'm distracted if my eyes are open. I'm a very visual person anyway. So like when I'm praying in spirit, I like to be outdoors. I love to see the glory of God in nature. It's just amazing to me. It's like a giant sanctuary, the
Yeah.
creation itself. Um,
Well, as men, we're definitely visual. We're visual in nature
oh,
compared to
there's no
feminine.
question. Yeah.
I mean, if you had a guy who came up to you and just said, and let's say you didn't have, I mean, of course you invited to your parish, probably most likely, but let's just say a guy came up to you and said, I'm trying to get more engaged in mass. And you kind of hear this, or you can imagine this happens all the time. And they're just like, well, what? I'm going to mass. It's not clicking for me. And I guess that's for sure a personal thing. But any things you would tell that person to be like, just let's say me when I was thinking.
Yeah, the first thing I would ask is, where is your focus?
Hmm.
Because if you're focusing on the people around you, and I've heard this before. This is one of the reasons I brought it up, that was the exact example that I heard. This person's wearing shorts and Birkenstocks. Well, why are you even noticing that person?
Yeah.
You're there before God.
Yeah.
You see what I mean? It has
Yeah.
nothing to do with that person or what they're wearing, or it has. And so a lot of times we can create distraction just by, first of all, I would say this: if we are noticing what's wrong with everyone else, we're there for the wrong reason.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
the Eucharist is the Eucharist. If you go there to experience God, to hear God, you will hear God. And
Well,
so,
I agree with you 100%. But then what pops then image I'm popping in my head, probably not, probably shouldn't be, is a female saying, wearing something totally scantily dressed,
oh yeah,
cleavage and
been
everything.
there.
Why are you looking at me there? I mean, that should not be your focus. I'm like, well, you're guy, it's hard not to. So
Well,
sometimes
yeah,
you
I
design
say
these
I.
churches that are in the round where you literally can't even, you can't look straight. Or you're looking at the other side of the audience, not
Mhm.
the straight with a big crucifix, or you have this, all this visual stuff. I think it's hard. So I agree with what you're saying. Because I was saying, like, that was just the example of if I'm going to be arguing the point of going to a parish that had all these externals, and then let's just say you said, well, Mike, don't be so worried with these externals and the design of the church people are wearing. Applying that to what you said, I would say if I'm looking at a parish that has bells and whistles, all these this big light show, or I'll say a Protestant megachurch because this is what I feel like when I'm there. There's all
Yeah,
these mega show. I'm like, well, what is your focus here? You say it's worshiping God. I don't see any. It's more
right.
like this is people focused, and so
Mhm.
I guess to me, I feel like when I think about myself, my own responsibility, because it starts with myself, is that when I go there, I mean, I don't want to be a distraction to anybody else. So I think, but at the same time, I think I should be an influence to other people. So if I get up and like, well, the Lord's not going to judge me if I just wear shorts, and yeah, I'm not going to say to go. I'll probably go like this today, but there's some days like I should put a shirt and tie on because I'm
Mhm.
going to mass at like evening. What time we're recording this, so everyone knows what I'm talking about. That I think there's a responsibility. My kids see us. I visually make, I think that rubs off. And when I went to Latin mass, first time I started putting a tie and shirt on is because I just felt out of place. And I've also had, not to fit in, but I'm like, this just kind of like dressing up again. And
Well,
it
yeah,
kind of
yeah,
makes sense. And so I think all those externals sometimes from a local level, when I'm thinking about what are some solutions, is if I was the priest or if I'm even in the pews to encourage people like, hey, maybe, say some feelers or something, but at least yourself first. But if you
yeah.
see, that's what I'm getting at. I get to
Well,
that
I got
thing.
I so for again, what it goes back to is if you're doing it for you, okay, that's what it's going to come down to, Mike. I honestly believe this. Again, this is just my opinion, okay, but it's going to come down to where your heart is. Okay, so if you take let's say the person that goes to the male that goes to the Latin mass every single Sunday, follows every single word, checks every single box, right? And puts on the suit and the tie, looks good, got the perfect little family and the whole thing, but in his mind is thinking, I'm doing everything wrong and these people are all doing, or I'm doing
Right, for
everything right
sure.
and these people
Becoming
are
a
doing it wrong.
Pharisee. Yeah.
Exactly. So you remember Jesus talked about how they lengthened their tassels, and they were dressed immaculate,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
where were their hearts? He says their hearts were like whitewashed walls. And then you
Yeah.
got the beggar, right, that goes into the temple dressed in rags and won't even look up to heaven.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
100%. Yeah.
But now
100% agree.
I personally, I just to finish off, I would have a problem with like laser lights and strobes, and that is not that. See that that's going to the extreme left for
Yeah.
me. Is you're making it a show. You see what I mean? And
Yeah.
so you're more concerned about the aesthetics of the thing, right, than why you're actually there.
Yeah.
And I could go to the same way to the right side, where, well, it needs to be done like this, it needs to be done like this, it needs to be done like this, it needs to be done like this. People that do that tend to have a problem with Vatican II, and they have a real problem with this Pope. But when it comes down to it, they end up worshiping the liturgy rather than God. In other words, it's funny because you'll hear the same people say that faith without works is dead.
Hmm.
So they do all the works, but they don't have any faith that the Novus Ordo Mass is valid.
Yeah. Right.
So
Yeah.
they're it's almost contradictory in the sense that they think if they check all these boxes that somehow they get into heaven. The fact of the matter is we only get into heaven through the mercy of God by the works that he performs through us by faith, through faith in grace.
Yeah. And
It's
that's
all
why I like
him.
you, Vince, because
You
I mean
see?
you have that middle ground, and I just don't think, unfortunately, or what pulled me back, like Jesse Romero, awesome Catholic speaker, men's speaker. I think he goes to Novus Ordo Mass, but he can kind of he really pulled me back into the church because I never heard a guy with that kind of energy talking almost like a militaristic fashion
I
that men kind of
Yeah,
need to hear, but also had a balanced approach. And I think so. People like you are really good because I think you're in that level because you're a man's guy. You say it how it is. You look the part, but at the same time, have a level of humility, simplicity, and I say it with a very obviously up to respect.
yeah. It was the from what I understand, and I've only listened to Jesse a few times, but just in a couple of times that I heard him, and don't quote me on this because I may be wrong, but I think it was the Catholic charismatic renewal that drew him back into the church. And then from
Yeah,
the Catholic charismatic renewal, he's really been drawn to the traditional Latin mass. So I think he goes to the Latin mass now because he's very traditional, but he's well rounded,
yeah.
in
And
that
God love him.
sense.
I mean, he
Yeah,
he gets into some things that are just really hard political stances, which is fine. That's his. But yeah.
yeah,
So I point out someone like him can bring someone like me in, and I could go one or two directions. Even I mean, Michael Voris. I mean, I don't know what he's up to now, but back with Church Militant years ago, when I was a kid, I'd listen. That was the first exposure to hearing. Even though now, I mean, that you can't even say his name anymore. That's what happened to Church Militant. If you don't, are you familiar with that? The whole thing.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So, but that was the first time I ever heard a guy talking about just
I
basic
saw
Catholic
that one
teaching.
coming.
Yeah. Yeah.
I saw that coming a mile away.
But I remember as a kid, I'd be like, wow, I'd never heard this stuff going to private school and going to mass pretty much every Sunday, but in that very liberalized church that to me it was just yawning and boring. And like, honestly, I had a passion for God, but I just wish that we had more people. I'll put myself in there, but I'm pointing to you. More people like you who had this balanced approach that we saw as parishioners. I guess my whole thing is I think we are very needed and important in our local parishes to see someone like you doing what you're doing to bring those guys in who otherwise would might walk in and just see nothing against them. They're probably the most holy people in there. The people just in the back, which again are holding the line for everybody else. The little
Mhm.
old ladies doing the rosary. That's awesome. But I think if we yeah, how do we get those guys on the fence to not get radicalized one way or the
Yeah,
other? Yeah.
I think the first thing probably because some of those little old ladies are some of my best friends, but
Oh, of course. Yeah, no question.
stop by and ask those little old ladies to start praying the rosary for that intention. And as a I think as a starter, if men like yourself, myself, this is what got me into it, is that I noticed the same thing you did. Where are the men? Where are the men? And so there were men's groups that started. I started a prayer group that was only men for the first year before women were even involved in it. I didn't want any distractions. Nothing against women, not saying they
Yeah,
can't. The problem is some of them are too pretty and they become distractions. We needed a solid core of men that were praying together and that men can talk about. And so, like yourself, if you got involved in your parish and you say you go approach your pastor because everything's you want to do everything through your pastor, um, talk to him about starting a men's group.
yeah,
You see,
yep,
and then because I'll tell you one thing that happened. We started a men's group here, and that thing exploded. And the men around that table were talking about things they had no one else to talk to about. I mean, you could go into confession, you could talk to priest, right? But
yep,
it's one thing to talk to a priest in confession or make a meeting with a priest and talk to him about marriage. And the priest can give you wisdom to an extent. What they can't give you is experience because they've never been married. So when one married man sits down with another married man and the guy breaks and says, "Look, man, it's falling apart. I don't know what to do," and there's that support there.
yeah,
You see what I mean? And so it's not about one or two guys in the parish trying jumping up and leading thing. It's about a group of men supporting the other because
yeah,
men need that validation. At the same time, men need to be challenged. You know what I mean?
yeah. That's I
And
mean
so
that's
it'd be like if you and I went out, let's say you and I just went out fishing or we went out shooting. I guarantee you know it as well as I do, Mike. It would be a matter of 20 minutes before we bet each other who could catch the most fish or who could hit that, the
yep,
bullseye 100
yeah,
yards first. It's just you need that challenge. And so it wouldn't matter who won. You see
yeah,
what I mean? It's just the fact that you have the challenge.
right,
And so that's what I mean, as far as I can tell. Again, this is just my personal opinion in where those are probably the worst homilies that I hear is where there's not a challenge. We're not
yep,
left with a challenge. You know, our pastor does it all the time. He did this morning when he gave the talk. We had the last reading on the bread of life discourse, right? And that's basically what he said. Not he's a really nice guy, Father Larry. So he's, but he doesn't come off real strong. But if you really listen to what he's saying this morning, what he said in mass at the Novus Ordo in English, what he said is, "Why are you here?
yeah. Those are yeah. And I think
Why
when you
are
said
you here?" You
the
know.
men's group stuff is solid gold, and I think it can be a topic that if you get the wrong book or the wrong thing, you'll lose some guys because guys aren't going to read. I realize that some people are, and some people like that. But I would pop to my brain too is I'm really close to a guy who goes to the big charismatic churches or not charismatic church, big Protestant church, and gigantic church, and they're just growing by the week, tons of money flowing in, tons, really well organized, and he's really involved with the church and the men's group. And I asked to listen to the same thing. My kids one time went to their summer camp, which had a lot of money. They could do anything in the summer camp. It was amazing.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to him, I said, like, how's your men's group turn out? I was like, oh, we wouldn't believe it. We only get about we'll have a men's meeting that's one quarterly that tons of people come. You can't even get in the parking lot. A free breakfast, all you can eat, gigantic breakfast. We start the men's group, maybe for 3 or 4 guys. And I said to him too, I'm like, when I went to the pick up my kids up at the camp, I said, it makes sense why you got no guys coming here because I know this whole place is run by your wives. That's the only reason this is popular is because the wives think this is awesome. It's like a big and social club. And the wives rather drag the husbands in here. There's no way I see these guys out here putting their hands in the air, doing this. There's a few of them, but point is, a lot of them are just kind of standing there. And so, to me, it wasn't a shocker that even they were struggling to pull 5 guys in. This is a place that has money, that has a paid
Yeah.
guy who's trained to bring people in and be a charismatic speaker that couldn't do it.
Yeah, in that same vein, Mike, and again, when I was contemplating some of the things some of the bullet points that you'd sent over, um, I think I think men in general, well, I would say both men and women, but from a male standpoint, I think that men are really struggling emotionally and psychologically in today's world, and I think a lot of that has to do with the neo feminist movement. I mean, if you go back just a few years with like when the Simpsons came out, and then you had these other cartoons that come out and like King of Queens, and really, really funny sitcoms, whatever. But in every single, what was the other one? Married with Children.
Yeah,
Every single case, the guy was the dummy.
yeah,
He's just this dumb old guy that looks at other women, and he doesn't know what he's doing. And so men have been dumbed down, and at the same time you have this neo-feminist movement telling women that they don't need men.
yeah.
You don't need a
Or
man, you
or
don't even
worse
need a
yet,
man
that
to
you're
have a baby anymore.
yeah,
you know
or worse yet, that if you do want to take the ropes and lead, that is somehow I think there's nothing wrong with the word patriarchy in my opinion, but that is some too patriarchal to even do that. So a guy's even afraid to step into that role because he's so conditioned and trained that no, we're so equal, we have equal gifts, equal charisms that you can lead, I can do this, versus like, no, this is your job. You need to step into it, lead your family to Christ. That's what you're there, the primary role. You've probably heard the statistics about practicing fathers and then what it's going to rub off to you versus if the wife was practicing and the father was not. It's just
right.
generally not going to turn out. So I mean, we're kind of getting towards the end of the hour here, but what would be some practical tips if you were talking to a guy? And I think you hit a lot of key ones already. I think a men's group is probably one of the most important things you can do. A solid men's.
Yeah, and I would state to personally, well, it's not to say that the books and things aren't good. They are. Okay, that's how ours started, but where it went to was the books just like faded away. And then what happened was you had 30 guys sitting around a breakfast table in a restaurant, a room that was rented for us specifically, talking about real crap. You
Yeah,
know what I mean? Talking about real problems. Not what did you think about this chapter and that. The women do the book studies. They love them. They're great. There's a women's group here that does it. It's really, really good and feeding them a lot. But
because they're actually reading the book too. That's why.
yeah, well, yeah. So most guys aren't. A lot of guys aren't readers. But that's what I noticed is we got most out of the men's group when guys started opening up about their weaknesses, because that's what guys are afraid to do. They're
Yeah,
afraid to admit they're weak. They're afraid to admit. But when you hear another guy say, "Well, I kind of struggle with this," and all of a
yeah,
sudden the guy down at the end of the table, it's okay for me to say that.
yeah.
And so they start feel there's a camaraderie that's built. So I think the men's group is a men's group is important.
And
I,
this, there's no bigger brotherhood when you got. I mean, me and you, we clicked immediately, and I get that with anybody who's just I would say even a practicing Christian too, not to be a Catholic, but more so Catholics because you're more closer aligned with just hitting all cylinders. It's just automatic. But it's like talking to a brother. You can never meet the person, and if you're already practicing, you're in the faith. It's like you just click automatically, even if the backgrounds are different. And that's, I think, a men's group does that because you go
right.
into a church and you're just on all cylinders. Versus,
Yeah.
I think sometimes these men's groups we're gonna have a men's group. So not that Knights of Columbus can kind of get like this, but they're kind of different. But it's like, well, we're gonna get together and we'll have a couple beers or a campfire thing. And I'm like, if you're not a topic, I gotta get into some meat here. We can do that occasionally, just hang out. But that's the
Yeah,
opposite.
we actually we had a I can't remember what my buddy Scott, he was the one leading it. Um I can't remember what he called it, but it was a day we had planned for that whole group to go out and do nothing but shoot.
Yeah.
You know, so you don't have to
Yeah.
be sitting
Yeah.
around eating food. Go out and be men, you know?
Yeah, for
And
sure.
so
Yeah.
we miss, I think we get caught up in a, you know, almost like a, how do I say, like it's almost cyclical, you know, it's like, it becomes boring, same old thing every day. We get up, we get dressed, we go to work, we come home, you know, and you have to have that time away, you know, with other guys, just like women need time with other women. They have to have that. You
Yeah.
know, if women don't have that, it can really put a strain on a marriage. And the same with guys, you know, but you always want to come back to the spouse. And so it's like you said, there is a leadership role for men um, in marriage. Okay, so personally, the way I would see it happening is the two people, the man and the woman, the husband and the wife. Let's say there's a decision to be made. They pray together about it, and then speak to each other about what they're discerning, and then ultimately the man makes the decision, and
Yeah.
the woman supports that. Because most men in general, I think, I would say 99.9% of men, that's really all they're looking for in a spouse. You know, pretty is one thing, but pretty goes away after a while. They want a woman that's going to support them, that's going to honor them, that's going to respect them, you know,
And call them out. I mean, I tell my wife all the time,
exactly,
I
yeah,
want you to call me out. If nothing makes
yeah,
me feel better, more energized, you say, hey, Mike, you didn't get enough Bible study with the kids, or you didn't do enough with the kids with that. I'm like, fair enough. That'd be
yeah.
awesome. I would
Yeah,
love that.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
There's a soft spoken wisdom there, and women have there's. It's not to say that it's a lesser role, because women have a role that is a leadership that is so unique and so beautiful that men could never fill.
Amen.
You
Yeah.
know, these things, these soft words of wisdom that they give you. You know, I have a couple of female friends that I think I've heard God speak to me through them more than anyone else. And it's just little things, and it's just a comment on the side, or you know, you know, you need to look at this, or it's like, I'll give you an example. This was years ago. I put in an application for to be a youth director at one of the churches, and at one of the parishes, and I didn't get it. And I'm like, and I really wanted it. I really, because I loved the kids. I'd been there for a long time, you know, and so, and I didn't get it. And so I was kind of venting to this friend. And I said, I don't understand. I said, I've been here long. I know them. They know me. It's like, I don't know why. I can't, I just, and I was frustrated with the whole thing. And she looked right at me and she said, well, sometimes he humbles us through humiliation. I never forgot that.
Yeah.
I never forgot that, you know? And so, because I was so confident I was going to get it and then didn't, you know, but it's, women have a very, very specific role, a very beautiful role, you know. If they want to know what that is, just look at Our Lady.
Yep.
You
And I
know, I
mean,
mean,
I got Saint
is it?
Jacinta behind me. I mean, that's why I put her as my avatar on the YouTube channel, because she's as hardcore as anybody. I mean,
Oh
she's just
man,
a little
yeah,
girl, so I always look up to her as like, geez, yeah. If I was just could be as hardcore as this little, what if she's 6 or 7 or something,
yeah,
I'd be happy with that. So yeah, yeah,
yeah. Well, that's what Our Lady does. She guides us to Jesus. You know what I mean? I can't think of
yeah.
a better gift, or a better role for a woman. You know what I
Well,
mean?
you
It's
said it
funny because
right.
we
You
say,
said gift. Because somebody asked the other day, or this popped in my head the other day. Someone's like, "Why do you need Mary? I mean, why would God give you just go to Jesus? Why would God give us?" I'm like, because it's a gift. Why did God give you trees? I mean, it was a gift. I mean, it's a blessing to have
well, it makes
this
sense too.
motherly
And
thing.
I'll
Yeah.
tell you, I'll share this with you real quick, just from an apologetic standpoint. Um, if you look at the kingdom that Jesus is setting up biblically, it is a Semitic kingdom. And
Yeah.
so you have a king, you have a prime minister, you have, you know, the whole thing. So it's all there. You have
Yeah.
Jesus, you have Peter. Well, in that Semitic kingdom, the mother of the king is always the primary intercessor for the people to the king. And the reason is because the king can't say no to mom.
Yeah.
And so if you just look at it from a theological and even biblical standpoint, that really points out who Mary is and why Catholics believe what they do about Mary.
That's a
You
good
know,
closer, because I think you summed it up. Is I think if we just replicated that in the family, I don't think this issue, this struggle we'd have with guys in church,
yeah.
much of a
Well, I
problem at
think
all.
there's a real struggle, right? It's a spiritual battle that's going on, Mike, in society at large. there are powers at play that are pitting men against women, and the goal is to break down the nuclear family. And so that, and we are in a battle like we've never been in before. It's real darkness. And so I think that, again, this is one of the reasons I think that we see, such a lack of leadership in the church among laymen. And yeah, there's, again, and a lack of challenge. I think maybe some of that probably stems from the priests upsetting their bishop with sermons that are a little too fire and brimstone. But we
Yeah.
need to understand that that mercy is balanced with justice. And so for one of the things I think you could say, and I don't know how you would do this. I did it when I was able to do it when I did a presentation at OLA at the Army. And again, that video is on my YouTube channel in the community section. But one of the ways that I put this to women was about the way some of them dress, is that the priest is there too. And the priest is just a man. And the
Yeah.
priest is just as visual as we are. And, what kind of attention are you really looking for? Because if you think
Yeah.
the guys are looking at you in a good way, you're wrong.
Yeah.
They're not. And so I think it really has to come back around to us. Am I dressing up for the Latin Mass just to look good for the people that are around me? Am I trying to impress them, or am I trying to impress God? If I go to the Novus Ordo Mass and I'm wearing, not that I would ever wear a pair of shorts, I wouldn't, but say I'm wearing a pair of shorts and Birkenstocks, or someone else's, and I'm noticing that person, am I there to notice that person, or am I there to encounter God?
Yeah.
And it's the same with the woman. Am I dressing in a way that is, and this is, I think, for women, and I'm not saying this in a bad way, I'm trying to say it in the nicest way I possibly can. But I think that would be the question to ask ourselves. The same with the guy. Am I dressing up so I can impress people around me?
Yeah.
So am I dressing up so men will look at me, or am I dressing in a way that I'm not leading someone else into sin?
Well, I just heard today
It's,
mainstream article that more women are wire veils coming back. I think so. I think that was a mainstream
they
article.
are.
Yeah, so I think
Yeah.
that turned to modesty. A lot of things are turning, so I think that's good. I got to wrap it up though to head to mass, so make sure I don't leave my family get there on time. But,
Yeah.
um,
Be a good leader, Mike.
yeah, yeah, right. We'll
Let's
definitely
do this
this
more
was,
often.
yeah, exactly, yeah, for 100%. So this is just kind of a feeler teaser to see just us. We're already talking, so might as well hit the record button. So we'll see how this goes, and appreciate Vince and all his time. We'll link everything down below to find Vince and all what he does, and hopefully do this again.
Yeah. Check out the two books too. Beyond the
Oh yeah, oh
Second
yeah,
Veil.
geez, yeah.
Yeah.
Show them really quick.
That's Beyond the Second
That's
Veil.
the one
It's
I gotta
at
get.
lulu.com. And Concerning Chloe, this one, all the proceeds to this goes to a women's crisis pregnancy center. So check the books out. And I'm working on another one now, so keep me in prayer. I'm working on Daniel. If I get permission to publish that, I got to run it by my spiritual director first. It might go in a little too heavy. I don't
Will
want to
do.
scare
We
anyone to
should have
death.
started with the book plugs. Jeez. Okay. Yeah, we'll
Yeah,
do
well,
that.
that's all
All
right.
right. All
That's all
right.
right. Just throw the links down there in the bottom. I think you can find them on my channel. So just copy the link and throw them up there if you want. And I'll share this. I did mention on my YouTube channel that we were going to be doing this. So, if it goes well, man, if people like it, we'll just keep doing
Yeah.
it. I don't
Yeah.
think it's a bad idea, to start, it doesn't always have to be about visions and God,
Oh yeah, 100%. It's
all
one
that stuff.
person likes it. Yeah.
There's
I'm
real
already.
stuff going on in the world that needs to be discussed. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Awesome.
sounds
All right.
good, man.
Thanks, Vince.
All right, brother.
See
God
you,
bless you.
brother.
All
Thanks.
right.
You too. All right. Bye.
Bye.